Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of today's guests, including John Shannon, standing by, brought to you by the Vancouver Giants. Giants would like to thank their fans for their support this season at the LAC and can't wait to welcome them back for 2023-2024. Get your season tickets for next year now at vancouvergiants.com/season tickets. Speaking of the Giants in the Western Hockey League, Kamloops, the Memorial Cup starts this weekend with the Blazers against Quebec on Friday.
Roy, Quebec Remparts.
All the best to the organizers up in Kamloops and the teams involved as we bring in NHL Analyst, co-host of the Bob McCown podcast. He's been to a Memorial Cup or two. John Shannon, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Memorial Cup's fantastic.
Yeah.
It is one of the great events for 9 or 10 days. And really, in so many ways, you get such a sense of the future of the game by being around the four teams, and it's a blast. I did, I think, 4 of them in the mid of the last decade, and it became a real treat.
Yeah. For people who haven't been, I always describe it as the Canadian version of the Final Four. I love that you'll get alumni from the 4 teams involved there. There's a lot to be seen. Good party. Hey, John, Florida is moving on to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time since '96. That was early in their existence. Mm-hmm. We all know the visuals of the empty seats in that building. Between '96 and now, were there times when you thought, like, how long can this franchise last there?
Well, I think we had a lot of conversations about what was going on in South Florida, like we had conversations about what was going on in Arizona. Mm-hmm. And the biggest difference between the two was that ownership was able to find a way to have an arena built, albeit not in the greatest part of the urban areas of South Florida, whether it be Fort Lauderdale or Hollywood or Miami, but it's out near the Everglades and on the way to Alligator Alley. But it's still a big building, and they can still sell it out. And they have done some good things, particularly this playoff. So you have to cross your fingers and hope that this will be that watershed moment when they say the team has arrived.
Yeah. What do you think people in Vancouver are thinking some things as well, but what do you think people in Calgary are thinking watching what Matthew Tkachuk is up to?
Well, Matthew Tkachuk was not going to sign long-term in Calgary. Mm-hmm. He told Brad Treliving that, and Brad Treliving did him a favor. And in doing so, we all thought Brad Treliving did a solid job in getting a pretty good return with Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar and a couple of other assets. So, I mean, we were all saying that Brad Treliving should win the Manager of the Year before the season started for what he did. That didn't contemplate what was going to happen with the coach and what was going to happen with the players interacting with the coach in Calgary this year, plus some pretty mediocre goaltending most of the season. So from that point of view, I look at that line a little differently when you think of Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, another Calgary Flame guy, and Reinhart. Well, Paul Reinhart played a lot of pretty good years in Calgary, as he did in Vancouver. And Sam, who's really a North Shore kid more than anything else. Mm-hmm. But, there's a connection with Calgary with Reinhart as well because of his dad. So that whole line would drive Flame fans nuts, in my opinion.
John, you mentioned Brad Treliving. He's in Toronto this week interviewing for the Maple Leafs GM job. Is he a serious candidate in your eyes? Or give us a little recap of what you're hearing in Toronto. Who's going to replace Dubas?
Well, I think that there's a lot of people suggesting that Brad is the odds-on favorite to replace Kyle. I just think it's too early to decide that. I certainly, Brad would interview well. Brad is a solid statesman. Brendan Shanahan would have plenty of time to be able to speak with him this week. But to me, when you consider that Brendan Shanahan said he really started to look in earnest after Kyle Dubas' press conference on Monday of last week. So he's had 10 days to look at candidates, and we're going to make a decision this quickly. That doesn't make much sense to me. They still have some quality people in the front office that can do certain things, whether it be prepare for the draft or even sign some guys to contracts or build negotiating practices for contracts, and guys like Brandon Pridham and Lawrence Gilman. So from that perspective, I don't know why Brendan Shanahan would be in that much of a hurry to sign somebody right away, unless he got the sense that this was going to be the only guy available or this was the only guy for the job, and I just don't see that.
What do you see in Ottawa? It looks like they're down to the final stages. Who's going to be the new owner there, John, in your eyes?
Well, we've talked about it on this show, and I've talked about it on other shows. I've always thought that Michael Andlauer was going to be the inside track. The fact that he's been to the Board of Governors representing Montreal many times, he has a familiarity with Gary Bettman and Bill Daly in the NHL office. I think that Andlauer has basically been vetted already because of his partial ownership of the Montreal Canadiens. So from that perspective, I think that Andlauer has always had the inside track and just now is trying to agree on that, what that final figure is. The other two groups, the Kimmels and the Anstopouloses, both Toronto millionaires, billionaires, are going through the same process, but my money's still on Michael Andlauer. I'd be shocked if it wasn't him.
Hey, John, getting back to the Leafs general manager situation, and maybe Pittsburgh's in this conversation as well, Kevin Bieksa has been talking with Elliot Freeman and saying that why isn't anybody mentioning his old boss, Mike Gillis? Has his name been thrown around there at all?
I have not heard. Obviously, Mike Gillis, the last time Mike Gillis's name was brought up was to be the executive director of the Players Association,
yes, right.
where he has been a consultant for the last 18 or 19 months. But I have not heard Mike's name in terms of the Pittsburgh scenario or even the Philadelphia scenario. The one thing I could tell you is that it becomes a question of relationships. And it's one of those things that you wonder now what Mike's relationship is with the guys in the New York office with Bill and Gary, and how would that affect things. John Henry and the people at Fenway Sports Group that own the Penguins now are doing things a little differently, I think. If you guys have followed the track, but the guy in charge for Fenway is David Beeston, who is Paul Beeston's son. The former, chairman of the Blue Jays and COO of Major League Baseball. So David is working for John Henry in that group, and he's going to pick the new president of hockey ops and general manager. And whether it's Kyle Dubas or Eddie Olczyk, who I believe has talked to the team, there's going to be some big changes in Pittsburgh, and hopefully try to re-engage with the fan base there. But in all honesty, I have not heard Mike's name. And Kevin's probably very right that Mike Gillis deserves an opportunity.
Hey, back to last night, and the Hurricanes lost to the Panthers. 4 1-goal losses. Do you understand where Rod Brindamore was coming from? I'm not sure he expressed it all that well, but he felt it wasn't a sweep. He took some criticism for that because, it's a fact. It was a sweep. But do you understand where he was coming from?
Sure. When you consider that you had 2 overtime games, and then you might as well have called last night an overtime game as well, right? With 4.9 seconds left in regulation to score the goal. And the other game was a 1-0 shutout by Sergei Bobrovsky. Carolina missed Andrei Svechnikov. Last night they missed Jacob Slavin for most of the game after the Bennett hit. They never addressed, and we did talk about this around deadline, guys, they never addressed finding a sniper. Every other team has a sniper, whether that's Mark Stone in Vegas, Jason Robertson in Dallas. Carolina was a great team, but every once in a while you need that unique player to be able to say, boys, jump on my back. I'm going to get us to the goal right now. Matthew Tkachuk has become that guy in Florida. They don't have that body and haven't had that body in Carolina ever. And it's something that I think at some point they have to address. They thought Max Pacioretty was supposed to be that guy, but his Achilles issue popped up again. And so that was a problem. But even at the deadline where they could have gone out and found a sniper, they didn't. And it really hurt them, particularly in this series.
Yeah, hard to watch what Pacioretty went through on the ice, and certainly last night, Slavin as well. We are live. John, you want to say something, Rick? Sorry.
What did you think of Craig Conroy in Calgary? John. Tell us live. What do you thought? What do you think of that?
Well, it's nice to see good people rewarded for hard work. Here's a guy from upstate New York that people say, well, Americans don't like to play in Canada or live in Canada. Well, here's a guy that has made the commitment to living in southern Alberta, has worked his tail off within the organization. So that's a positive. I think part of the sell job too was at a key time that they're going to get that guy out of Kelowna named Jerome McGinley to come out and work with the organization. I think that will be a positive. So from that perspective, I think rewarding people for hard work is something we haven't seen very often in our league and our sport for a long time. It's nice to see. And by the way, Rick, strawberry rhbarb.
For pies?
For pies.
Yeah.
Not cherry. Strawberry rhbarb.
Sorry.
Wow.
Donnie and I had cherry trees. We sat up in those trees for hours.
Hey, guys,
and
I
then
grew
made
up
pies.
in the Okanagan Valley.
Okay.
I grew up in the Okanagan Valley on an orchard. I know all about cherry trees and apple trees and peach trees.
Yeah.
But strawberry rhubarb's at the top of the list, boy.
It's up there. It's up there.
Rick enjoys a good cobbler as well. John, thanks.
I'm not touching that. You two guys were snorting water out your nose there at one point, so I don't want to do that.
Not the first time. Thanks, John. We'll talk to you next Thursday.
Cheers.